Hey guys, Ted here from Down the Alley. The holidays are right around the corner, which means it's time for Old Southern Barbecue's twice smoked hams and turkey dinners, sourced locally right here in Minnesota. Dinners come with fire-roasted corn, mashed potatoes, and a Lunds and Byerly's pie, a perfect assist for your holiday menu. You can order in-store or online at oldsouthernbarbecue.com. Also, if you don't need the food but you want to give the gift of barbecue to your favorite backyard pitmaster, check out the online store for sauces and seasonings and use the code DTA15 for 15% off your purchase. Either way, make sure to tell them that DTA sent you. Are you looking for a dedicated partner for your lacrosse needs? ES Lacrosse has got you covered. If you're brand new to the game, a seasoned vet, or a dedicated lacrosse parent, ES Lacrosse is the go-to partner for Minnesota lacrosse and DTA Nation. Whether you need new gear, a restringing of your current setup, custom uniforms or apparel for your team, or one of their awesome starter sets for your brand new lacrosse player, the selection, expertise, and service at ES Lacrosse is unmatched. You can visit them in-store at one of their 3 metro locations in Woodbury, Chanhassen, and Vadnais Heights, or visit them online at eslacrosse.com.
Welcome to Down the Alley. This is PMAC.
And Ted T.S. Spirides.
Now, I know we're going to jump into, kind of a interview slash, we got a couple people joining us for some topics.
A panel discussion, maybe.
A panel discussion is what we're going to call it tonight. But if you're sticking around, I've got rants. I've got rants later tonight. I've got things, we haven't been on the mic, so I'm fired up. I'm coming in hot. We're coming off a trip, a couple weekends ago. So we've been out in the wild. There's topics to talk about. There's things to rant about. But I'm excited. We've got a couple of, big time guests, big fans of the show. Guys who have been, around, and, I'm excited to see where, this conversation goes as well.
Yeah. And you probably know by now, if you listen to the intro, but our show is brought to you by Old Southern Barbecue and our newest sponsor, ES Lacrosse, the lacrosse provider, retailer in Woodbury, Chanhassen, and their newest location, Vadnais Heights. So we are excited to have them on board with us this season, along with Old Southern Barbecue. So, look for some new content with them coming up as well. But I'm excited about tonight's topic. We missed last week. I apologize for not getting anything out.
And I'll tell you why I wasn't available. When I rant about this, it's a guy who sat between us on the airplane. So again, I've got things to rant about. I was out cold. I was a zombie last week, and it wasn't my fault. Wasn't Ted's fault. So more to come. Yeah. I am sorry that we weren't able to fire up the mics, but good reason on my part. I was unavailable.
Yeah, I'm gonna let our first guest. Do we want to let him in and then talk about the topic, or should we preface this before we let him in?
Let's let him in. Let's see where the conversation starts, and then we'll get to the topic, eventually. I don't know if it'll be, right away or what.
Well, we want to welcome our guests, Coach Chaun Klemetsrud, Coach Rob Horn. Not the first time they've been on the show. We're getting them back because tonight we are going to talk a little bit Minnesota lacrosse history. Chaun has a great knack for asking me open-ended questions at like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and then it occupies my whole week around like diving into stats. And this week was, I don't even remember what the question exactly was, but we started thinking about like who are the top 10 greatest Minnesota high school teams over the years. We decided that we'll start in 2007 MSHSL official sanctioned teams. And as we kind of dove into this, we had to bring Rob into the mix because he was living and breathing high school coaching. At that time, I wasn't quite into it yet. Chaun, I don't know what year you got into it. but you two have a lot of history with a lot of these teams, personally coaching them, but have been around so long, invested in the game. So, I think it's time that the people start to learn a little bit about the history of the game and these teams over the years and some of the great players that have come out of the state.
One thing that we were talking about, Ted, when it's state hockey tournament season, and it's like, oh, the 1964 Jaguars, they bring that up every single year. It's like in the lacrosse world, we're never like, oh, the 2017 Egan Wildcats were, just this blackjack table of a team where the table got hot and they ran with it. And I think that's something that maybe we can, starting tonight, maybe bring to the lacrosse world.
Yeah, and so we started like kind of this list. I think originally we were gonna like rank like 10 down to one or up to one. I don't know. I think this is a first conversation of maybe multiple, but um, I think as we looked over the years, obviously a lot of teams on this list are programs that have perennially been great year over year. Um, and, a lot of these teams, we're going to focus on the champions specifically and maybe do some notable teams that weren't champions. But a lot of these teams that were champions one year were runner up a different year. So it was like teams that were really consistently playing to the end every single year. Minnesota State High School League sanctioned lacrosse. The first season was 2007. So, you guys, should we start in 2007? I feel like oldest to newest would probably make the most sense. I don't have a rundown format, but 2007, the first year of Minnesota State High School League. A team that doesn't win a lot, the Benilde St. Margaret's Red Knights, conveniently started everything off for us. Team that was 17-0, state champs. Rob, you were co-head coach of this team?
Yeah, Colin and I were co-head coaches. I mean, we were literally just graduated from college,
Yeah.
both, the rightful age of 23 years old.
And so I don't have a ton of recollection of this group. I was still in college as well, so I wasn't coaching high school yet. A couple years before I got into it, but I know that you guys played Eden Prairie in the final. Eden Prairie, since the beginning of time has been great at everything, right? So, I kind of maybe walk us through that season, maybe some of who the notable players were and like what life was like as, it's this first year of Minnesota State High School League, like this whole new thing.
That year was a rather unique year. And I remember that year, we were, and you think about the difference between the section tournaments now to then, right? And we complain about how big some of the sections are. I don't think anybody remembered how big the sections were back then. There were like 12 to 16 team sections. So your section tournament was, 2 weeks. I remember our section was probably the time where we actually had the most challenge in our schedule until we hit the state tournament. And that was because we were in this, I don't know if we were independent or, Jerry, our AD, set our schedule based off of like the football schedule at that time. Like, so we played a lot of teams that were really just getting started and we were beating everybody like 19-0. I think this was like Irondale's like first year of the team. So as we play some of these teams, I'd go out and like watch them. We'd keep the boys like, they'd be doing their warm up thing. I'd go over and watch some of the guys warm up and I'd come off the field. I'd try to like sell like one player is like the greatest player I'd ever see just to keep them focused and kind of keep them moving a little bit. But I mean, that team was so strong, top, like right up through the spine. And you always talk about having a great spine, your goalie, a really good close defenseman in the mix, a face-off player, an offensive midfielder, and like a ball-dominant attackman. Well, that team had not only a plethora of those positions, but I mean, the attack unit that year was one of the best units I ever had. Over most well-rounded, guys like Matt Draxler, Monroe Vibbard, Brett Hartman were in that mix. Then you had like Bo Malarnik, like true two-way midfielder throwback guys. In that group, you had Rudy Luther playing midfield for us through those years as well. And then like on the defensive end, you have like, Patrick Johnson, Brennan Harrington, guys who went on to play at St. John's locally. Uh, and then Kevin Bacon was in the goal. And he was actually went on to play at Nichols College after he graduated. So we did have a couple guys that were matriculating out through the cycle, but just a really athletic team. Definitely a lot. If you had two hands at that year, right, you were a really skilled player. A lot of these guys uh, seem to be able to do things with both hands, but definitely most had a dominant hand. But the game at that time was much more about the athletes still, still trying to figure out the game. That Eden Prairie team that year was probably the most skilled team we saw when we hit the state tournament. That was Eastview was there. I remember playing Eastview in the first round, and looking over, Tim was still there at that time, right? Coach Roach.
Yep.
And that Eastview program was really, just kind of getting its footing under them. But they were a great challenge in the first round. And then, you move into the state championship, right? And I remember it like it was yesterday. It's one of the few photos I save on my phone when I look so young. So it's really funny to look back on. But that game was 9-7. Um, we scored a goal late in the fourth with like 2.5 minutes to go and pulled away. But I specifically remember that final. Not only we wanted to be the first, like it was special, undefeated, whatever. But like, there's something to be said about being, you know, the first. And we broke the state championship trophy at the celebration on the field. There's a photo of like on the star trip of one of the guys sticking his face through the photo where it normally goes because it broke. But just a real dominant athletic team and it's much different. And it's fun to see the evolution even year over year as we get into some of the later years and even the jump to, I'd say, 2010, 2011, right? The difference between the 2017 team or '07 team and those teams at Benilde were night and day.
Yeah, and just to give some perspective, you said about kind of the way things were structured, it's different than it is today. There was four conferences in MSHSL. So you had the Classic Lake, you had the Lake, you had the North. So the whole North was just a conference in itself, and then an independent that had three teams. So Benilde was in the North, and then there was a bunch of club teams still. So not everybody made
Mhm.
the jump right away. And so, but yeah, big conferences, and then like you said, there was, I guess you could call it four sections, but it's just this big, 40 team bracket basically. And you just play your way through. So, yeah, kind of, yeah, go ahead.
So what's really like leading into that year is coming off of Blake's, correct me if I'm wrong, back-to-back state championships at the club level,
Yep.
right? And Joe Seibold was still, the head coach there at Blake at that time, and they were, the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room, right? At that point, they were the standard for the state. It's kind of where everyone aspired to be from a private school model, and they had Eden Prairie taking up the reins on the public school side. And I remember playing them. I forget where the state section final was. It was like in the middle of nowhere, right? You've got two private schools driving like 30 minutes somewhere to go play each other when they're literally 15 minutes down the road from one another. Um, and I felt like that game was the biggest win of our year, right? To knock off, right, the defending champion, to end their run, right, and to know just how much talent they had in that group. That's one of those wins that, as a coach, and then looking back over time, of like, just that was a great lacrosse game, right? Even by today's standards, that's one of those few games you could look back and go, that was high school lacrosse.
Yeah.
As a starting point of those some really good battles.
Yeah. And, you were assistant coach of the year that year, it looks like. I've got
Yeah.
Darren's stats pulled up right now, and I mean, this guy probably could have given us team GPAs too, of each
Hmm.
team in the league. But, um, kind of moving on to then 2008. So you moved over to Blake in 2008. So still a young guy to take over a high school team in general, but not only a high school team, the high school team, the Blake Bears. And, that team won the state championship. So you're like, this is easy, right? It's just pretty easy. It's just like, this is just par for the course. But, how was that shift, going from Benil to Blake. You know, obviously they're both private schools, but they're different, right?
Yeah, there's great moments in your life where you're happy you challenge yourself, but you also kind of always look back and go, and I will never lament my time at Blake. I absolutely loved it, but I made that decision when Joe said he was going to be stepping down. My buddy tagged me and was like, "Hey, you should go over and do this. I know you and Colin enjoy what you have, but you should go try something." And that was a really hard decision, to walk away from a great program that Colin and I kind of like, remolded. It was already established, it was already built, but we had to kind of, move some things around and for us to kind of go our own separate ways. But I mean, that was, Chaun and I always use the analogy a lot. Like sometimes you get the keys to the car and you're like, just don't crash it. That was that, right? That team had talent. It had it in every aspect of the field. We just had to modify it slightly, change some processes, some way we do things, the old staff out, new staff in, with myself, Jim Riley, and Ian Gallagher. And obviously, when you have like the names that I'm looking at on the spreadsheet, those are like Minnesota legacy names in the
Yeah.
lacrosse world here, in my opinion. You got
Yeah.
Kip Dooley. I think of one of the state's only 4-time high school All-Americans, maybe 5. He played varsity at 7th and 8th grade.
Yeah, I remember when I first started playing lacrosse, I was in 8th grade and it was like a box league. And Kip was in like 3rd grade playing with 8th graders, and he was like fine. Like he was like serviceable out there because he was so much better and more talented than everybody. Like obviously athletically he wasn't there, but he like figured out a way to be serviceable as a 4th grader or 3rd grader against 8th graders. So and yeah, I mean, unbelievable talent. Chaun and I were talking about him today.
Yeah, to me, that's what sticks out. Because in 2008, so I was still in college. So I was just about to graduate. So I wasn't really following high school lacrosse like terribly close. But I knew who Kip Dooley was. I knew who Grant Dressen was, just because they were that good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then Jordan Seivold? Was that?
Yep, that was Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had Kip, who went on to Dartmouth and was a captain, right? And there you have, Jordan, who went on, started off at Navy and kind of bounced around like most people do these days at the Division I level, but ended up having a great career. You actually had Blake Dressen, so that was what's really funny. Grant was the backup goalie as a freshman that year to this goalie that most people don't know of. His name is Matt Isopro. He actually went on to walk on and make the team at Amherst the following year, and just loved the game and was a serviceable body. We went undefeated that year. He told me the day before our Minnetonka game, right? Like, and Minnetonka was big game. I think they were undefeated as well at that point in the year. Coach, I'm going on a college visit tomorrow. I'm not going to be here for the game. Like typical high school thing, right? Like we all lived it. Yeah. And I literally looked at Grant dressed as a freshman. I'm like, well, buddy, guess you're getting your first varsity game tomorrow, right? Like noon under the lights. It was super interesting. And then you obviously have somebody who I'm still connected to, still relatively close to, Peter Johnson, who was, when you talk about the legacy of Minnesota defensemen, Peter's in that top 3 conversation. Right. Yeah. Went on to play Yale, played in a Final Four, I believe, while he was there in NCAA tournament. Kind of it was a part of that program, that leadership group as a captain that turned around that program underneath Andy Shea with what he was building. But, that team was angry from the year before. And we've all, coached teams where they've played angry. They had that chip on that shoulder. That team was literally like, we want to beat everybody. We want to leave absolutely no doubt. We want to beat everybody in running time. And that, with all those upperclassmen there, I have to mention, George Ordway was a freshman that year. Yeah. And I think was the state's like second leading scorer. And everyone's like, well, Kip Dooley just gave him the ball. That was what people thought. It was like, well, no, Kip Dooley's an unbelievable table setter, but then you just put all this other additional talent around him. And yeah, it was great to win a state final in running time. I think that's the only team that has done that. Maybe I think Minnetonka in 09 might have done that or had it in running time for some time period, but I think that was kind of sweet during that time.
Yeah, I mean it looks like I'm just looking at the schedule. Obviously I don't know, I didn't fact check this, but you played EP in the season, beat them 10-9, so it was a close game, and then
Hmm.
16-5 in the state championship game. Most, like you said, most of those games were pretty, wide margin of victory. And I had it written down here. It looks like outscored your opponents in 5 playoff games, 70-22. So giving up 22 goals in 5 playoff games is really impressive. So yeah, that team, like talented, some huge names that went on to play Division One lacrosse when that wasn't really happening like at all in Minnesota. And obviously they're brilliant too because they're going to high
Hmm.
school. So, but yeah, that's a cool story about that group. Um, bumping into 2009. So Minnetonka, they kind of came out and I don't want to say come out of nowhere. It's hard to say Minnetonka coming out of nowhere for a sports championship, but like, it was kind of Blake, Benilde, Eden Prairie, and then all of a sudden Minnetonka, the vibe that I got from a couple people I asked were like they were big, they were strong, they were fast, they had a lot of seniors, and they were just dominant across the board.
Did they bring in
So,
a new coach that year too, or did I make that up?
no, I think that was
No.
Olivier's first year. He replaced
Yes.
Travis Wells, who stepped down. Okay, little pop quiz for the group here. So I talked to Coach Olivier a little bit this evening. I did a little pre-leg work.
Good, good, good.
Without looking at that roster, who was the most famous person on that roster
Most famous.
today? Most famous. There's somebody really
I
famous on
know.
that
I
roster.
know. I
I know
know.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean maybe I do know, but
Professional athlete.
May I?
go,
We'll
yes,
give
tell
we'll give
us.
the
Yeah.
group a couple. Bo Peterson.
No, Bo Allen.
Bo
Played
Allen, my
defensive
bad. Bo
tackle
Allen. Yeah, my apologies. Yeah.
Bo
He won a
Allen.
Super
with
Bowl
won the Super
Really?
Bowl for the Philadelphia Eagles.
for the Eagles.
He's yeah.
So that's the caliber athlete they had playing on there in a high school lacrosse game.
So there's a photo out there of giant Bo Allen at 6'6". Like he played Division I football in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
right? Like he had a college. He's playing close defense against Al Barnhart. Does anybody remember the Barnhart brothers
Yeah.
at
Oh yeah.
Lake?
Oh yeah.
Al was like not the tallest guy, and that's who Bo covered. But I talked to to Aaron. That was Pete Carbonneau, Sean Foley, Matt Wire, Chase Fisher. You know, Patrick Corney played close to LSM. I think he went on to Colgate. Parker Weinstock, who I know went on to Colgate. Preston Fisher, Jay Morgan. That team was loaded. Perspective: the Dykes, who we all know and love,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
They played JV that entire year and could not crack the varsity roster with their size and athletic ability.
Wow.
That's just like
Yeah.
Yeah.
they were talented.
And for me, like this was like the first year out of college. I was coaching MBSLA at the time, so our season had ended, and I remember going to this Minnetonka versus Eastview championship game, and just to Rob's point, seeing the caliber of athlete that Minnetonka had, it was insane.
Yeah, and kind of looking at that, they were 18-0, so they had, they got undefeated season. They had a lot of close games though, and I think that's again a testament to just being, so athletic. You can grind those ones out, but they had a 10-9 game against Eden Prairie in the sections. They had a 9-8 game against Blake. That was probably a slugfest. Two very different teams. Kind of trying to impose their style of play on each other, and two coaches that know each other very well. A 10-7 game against Benilde. So, that's a great season for Minnetonka. Like that was not an easy path for them. Like they beat all the teams that there's no, like, you can't go back and say like, oh, they had the easy road or they didn't beat. So like they took care of everybody they needed to take care of. And I've been hearing about this 2009 Minnetonka team even today as people bring it up. So and I wasn't quite in it yet, so I never actually watched them, but yeah, interesting factoids there.
Definitely.
Uh, yeah, bumping to 2010 now. Benilde back in, back as champs. They were 16-1. They had a loss to Blake in the regular season and then one in the playoffs. Um, Chaun mentioned Thomas Gilligan, the goalie, as one of the best he's seen. I've heard the name for sure. I never saw him play, but Benilde back on top. And your thoughts on that team?
I think that was Thomas's sophomore season, mind you. And obviously I have a pipeline into that group, right? To be honest, they are 16-1 with an asterisk. That one loss was two loss at Blake that year. I called it timeout. They put, I thought there was more time on the clock. I told the officials at the time to tick off the clock. They put more seconds on, and we won with like a Rob Horn back of the napkin, like drawn up on the whiteboard type of a situation there to get a game winning goal as time was expiring type of a situation. So I know that one is always sore, but you look at the inverse of what they did to us in the playoffs. That was humbling, right? Like, and that was like a runaway train. You poke the bear way too hard. Any sports analogy you want to use,
Yeah.
that's it right there. But that was tailored to Poussis' senior year as well as Bailey Dodds,
Yep.
where that team just had really good, strong senior leadership. And I believe the younger brother to Bo Malarnick, who I had in 2007, was Chase Malarnick, who was also a captain in that group. But I think also that 2010 group is a much different group than what we'll talk about in the next group. That team was all just grit and like willing to like turn the ball over to the horses when they absolutely needed to with Taylor and Bailey Dodds.
Yeah, and like I said in the beginning, we're running through the champions as sort of for this thing, but Chaun, you added kind of a footnote here of maybe a team that didn't win it, the Totino Grace team in 2007, with a couple Minnesota coaches that were players at that time.
Yeah, that 2010 Totino Grace team. So they ended up losing to BSM in the championship that year. But like the players on that team, Kyle Mork, Hawkert, really phenomenal defenseman. Zeilinger was in goal. Two studs in midfield, one now Division I lacrosse coach and Nick Kulpitz, and the current head coach at Benilde now, Giuseppe Palermo. They had kind of like a thunder and lightning kind of midfield option. And I just remember watching the state semifinal because, again, this is a time when there was only 4 teams that qualified for state. So the semifinal was Egan versus Totino. And there was a point late in the game that Totino goes into the zone, and it's a 4-3 game, mind you. That's the final score. It's 4-3. And Egan is firing away, like the zone confounds them for some reason, but they hit at least 3 pipes to potentially tie that, if not win it. But I just remember just sitting in the stands and just pulling my hair out, just wanting Totino Grace to win.
Yeah, I mean to think about Egan playing a 4-3 game is kind of wild, but yeah, no, I think I think that kind of leads to 2011 like you mentioned. So 2010 was Christian, your brother, there at Benilde.
Yeah,
2010. Okay.
That was his sophomore year. Yeah.
Okay. So that leads to 2011. Benilde goes back to back, 18-0. I don't have a ton of notes on this team, but I'm sure Rob, you know a lot about this team as your brother was there. Again, an undefeated championship season for the Red Knights.
That might be one of the most explosive teams the state has ever seen. And even by today's standards, right? Like that attack unit of, yes, my brother was included, but that like Will Hosley and Ryan Butts really started to come into his own during that group. Then you had like guys running out of the midfield like Christian Rico and Peter Schublum. Like those kids were smooth, both hands, could shoot it on the run.
Was Lamb and Workmeister there? Yeah, they were really really good players too.
I think Workmeister might have been my like a 2014.
There was 2.
Oh, there was 2. Okay.
I believe there's 2 Workmeisters, but I don't believe I know Josh, the one that you're talking about. I think he was older, but I don't think there was a Workmeister in that group. But I mean, again, that team, like the other BSM 2010 team, those kids were just a year older that had that great senior leadership underneath them. But these kids were all like, just dogs unleashed, right?
Yeah.
Like they were gonna, not only were they gonna beat you, they were gonna do it pretty, right? Behind the back goals, everything, everybody literally thought that they were going to win 3 straight going into 2012, and it was just unbelievable injuries that took away their three-peat, if you ask anybody, right? Like, I mean, the consensus was that it would be them and Eastview, but probably in the final, right? They were the 2 best teams with most of the best players, kind of on their rosters, and they were decimated by injuries that year, and 2012 was a hard year for them, but 2011's team was, yeah, watch out. I remember that one as well. That section final to me was, again, like, I was still the coach at Blake. I'm losing to, the old school that I left. I'm losing to my little brother on the other sideline. But that 2011 game was Simon Gondek.
Yeah.
Overtime,
Yeah.
right? Game winner bouncer over Grant Dresden's shoulder. After we had a chance to go down and win it in overtime, we didn't get the shot that we wanted. There's I can't. His name is I'm drawing a blank now, but he went on to play at Lafayette. And LSM stripped our midfielder. They went down, threw it to Gondek, and he rolled a bouncer in right over Grant's shoulder. And they went on. But again, another great game, great matchup. But that team was very talented. They just weren't going to be denied.
Yeah. And so, what time frame here were kids starting to do club lacrosse and like Minnesota Elite? Like, when was that? Because it was like the Vail team, and it was just like one week of games or whatever. But at some point, right, they were starting to play more lacrosse and expose themselves to higher levels.
I think you started to see Minnesota Elite really start to gain traction in 05, right? But it was 06, but the roster was very mixed. Not, I wouldn't say mixed. It was maybe a conglomerate of like 5 to 6 high school programs max, at that given point in time, just based off of the talent level in the state. And then I would say in 2008 is where you started to see the big jump, right?
I was going to say, it was right around that time.
Yeah. A lot of those kids played Minnesota Elite on the 08 Blake team. And then 2009's, Tonka team, as I'm reading the roster, they were all in the elite program. 10, BSM, all of them, right? Like, and there was a certain point where I looked over my other elite coaches and I was like, man, I love coaching these kids because they compete so hard, but I really hate training them up to beat me in the game, right? It kind of, the competitive spirit in you kind of comes out, but that's what it felt like. But that what I think was the big swing is that 08, 09, 010 cycle.
And we kind of started to see it, like a combination of club lacrosse and kids playing a little bit more, playing at a higher level, playing with kids that, other elite level players. But then, the youth programs in the state kind of started to get established and organized. There there really was a big jump in that 9, 10, 11 time. Like, that was what PMAC and I talked about a long time. I think that was like the golden boom of lacrosse. Like, everybody was trying it, all the athletes were trying it, and that kind of led us into the early 2010s. But I was just curious on, like, so 05, it started earlier than I actually thought. So but yeah, so then you kind of mentioned it about Eastview. So now we're in the last year of what we would call the old playoff format. So we're in 2012 now. Eastview, they were 16-1. They lost to Lakeville North in the regular season, beat them in the playoffs, and went on to beat Eden Prairie in the final, right? Eden Prairie. I could pull that up, but so they get their first title, but they'd been in the mix. They'd been a good team over the few years. They finally get theirs. I do remember Jake Hepner. He actually went on to play at Duluth, I think. Was a really good attackman. Ryan McNamara, who everybody knows. I don't think Rex was actually there yet, so I'm going to take that off. But I think they had a Stillings brother there at that time as well.
Joey.
Yeah. So, from the little I've heard of this from Tim, this team was built on grit, athleticism, physicality. Obviously they had some good lacrosse players. They played strong defense. They won faceoffs. That's the story that I've been told. But any thoughts on the 2012 Eastview Lightning?
This is the Dark Army.
This is the birth of the Dark Army.
This is the birth of the Dark Army. This is the Eastview Dark Army, which has kind of been like, I don't say like been forgotten, but it's kind of been pushed to the side, obviously, with them now being co-opted with Apple Valley and becoming the Valley. But like, this is when they got their swagger. I mean, they already had it, but this is when it was like everything was clicking for him.
Yeah. Um, and you mentioned a side note here, EP. They were another really good team. That's who Eastview beat in the final. And you said that Tonka EP section final game was a great one.
Yeah. So I was coaching at Champlain at the time. We were competing in the same section with Eden Prairie and Minnetonka. We had played Eden Prairie in the section semifinal. We lost 7-6 because Jake Woodring just would not be denied.
Yep.
But yeah, that section final again, just between like just large Lake Conference athletes just going at each other is pretty much what it was.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's cool. Now we're into 2013. We've gone to 8 sections, so the growth of the sport now is getting into high school. Was it 14 that it switched, or was it 13? I think it was 13.
I think it was 13.
It was 13.
Now I can start contributing.
Yeah,
now
so
I'm old enough.
PMAC is now in high school. And 2013, we're going to 8 sections. Things are changing. And Eden Prairie, this was my first year back coaching high school. I was coaching at Blake, and I got to personally see this Eden Prairie team. But Eden Prairie gets their first state championship. After years of being very close. This team was absolutely stacked as well. And they actually beat Eastview. I think maybe a lot of people thought that was going to be a back-to-back for Eastview with some of the players that they had, but Eden Prairie prevails and wins. They were 18-0 as well that year. 5 All-Americans on that team. Eric Andreen, Brooks Armitage, I believe. Armitage.
Yep. Armitage.
Thielman, Jake Woodring. They just had that team was a bunch of dudes, like just straight up. And I think I don't want this to come across as like a knock on EP, but I feel like this was the start of EP's model of I need 5 or 6 really good lacrosse players, and then we're gonna get the athletes and plug them in, and then you're pretty much screwed at that point. I think they had like a 3rd string D Midi who is a starting corner on the football team. I think his name was Nick Bentz. But just like our Blake team played them, we got boat raced in the game. And it just, our guys were running for their lives, and it didn't even look like Eden Prairie broke a sweat. So, and Jake Woodring obviously went on to play at Denver. Just a brick shit house, hard to move, great midfield, 2-way midfielder. But any thoughts on the Eagles 2013 team?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of it. Just in terms of this was also a time when, again, in the 4-team section, a lot of people were wondering like, can Eden Prairie do it? They're always kind of like they were always like in the mix. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride kind of a situation. And this was the year that they finally like broke through and won. And I remember coaching at Champlain that year, and we played that Eden Prairie team. We lost 13-3, and I still have visions of Eric Andreen just pounding our guys from box line to box line. You just could not escape him.
And he went on to
Hobart.
Yep, Hobart. Yeah, so I think a handful of the Blake kids that I coached played elite with him, and so they were just like, yeah, like this guy's just obviously like kind of a one of a kind, just a wrecker in the middle of the field, and obviously got awarded All-American, so everybody knew it.
One of the craziest games and performances by 2 individual players was this year, not in the state championship, but in the section of death where Prior Lake is from. Ryan McNamara, right? A guy who was mentioned earlier, had a crazy performance. I should probably pull it up what the actual stats were, but it was him and a guy from Egan. I can't think of his. Yeah, played against.
1.
What was that?
Yeah, 12 goals, 1 assist.
12
goals,
and
1 assist.
These 2 guys were just teeing off on each other, and it was one of the craziest performances of all time.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, because people often forget like crazy section games. And to your point, I think it was 18-19 was the final score of that section final.
It was. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now.
And the fact that Ryan McNamara was responsible for 13 of those things was insane. So coaching at Champlain, we won our section that year, and we played Eastview in the semifinals. And I remember watching that section final and just breaking out in a cold sweat, just thinking, how the hell are we going to stop this guy? And we ended up just locking him with a long pole the entire game. He still got an assist, but we ended up losing in the section in the semifinal 10-6. But yeah, that Eastview team was special.
Yeah, God bless Laxub here. So yeah, Ryan McNamara, like you said, 12 goals, 3 assists, 15-point game. In a 19-18 win. Cullen Willicks had 8 goals and an assist for Egan. You want me to look up the goalie stats here?
0% save
That's just
percentages
cruel.
or what?
That's just
Both
cruel.
rocking in the 40%. The Luke Westrom from Egan saw 32 shots on goal. And Jeremy Leclerc saw 34 shots on goal for Eastview. So,
so it's 3 times that.
yeah, no, yeah. Who's doing the stats? And I don't know, the Eastville guy had 16 saves and he gave up 18 goals. So I mean, 16 saves is a decent day, right? That's a solid day for a goalie. So tough out for but yeah, that it is kind of probably the greatest, I don't know, just individual back and forth performance between, I guess, two teams. There's been some great games, as of recently too, but going into 14 now, Eden Prairie, I felt that year was kind of maybe flying under the radar. Hard to say about Eden Prairie lacrosse flying under the radar at that time, but they were 17-2. They lost their second game on May 1st, and then won 13 straight to the championship. I mean, obviously 17-2 is a really good record, but that year there were a lot of other really good teams I felt like were getting a lot more attention. I don't remember much about the 2014 Eden Prairie team. That might have been Nicky Lieberman's freshman year, but I don't know if he was playing varsity at that time. But they were definitely still a team that was in the mix every year after that, but that was their last championship team at that they've had.
Do you remember where this championship game was played?
I do.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chaun.
Well, there was a storm, right? And it got played.
Kiss of death.
It got played at Rosemount.
At Rosemount on a Monday.
On a Monday morning against the runner-up, Rosemount. So are they the only team to have a home game in the state final? I don't know. Some of these early years, I don't even remember where they were playing these games. But yeah, I remember that causing a lot of controversy.
Also, mind you, this was also before turf, so I believe it was also on grass.
It was on grass, yeah. Is that so? Okay, so you're the two teams, right? You're Rosemount, you're Eden Prairie. You're ready to play in the state championship. The weather comes in, nothing you can do about it. And they go, we're gonna play at Rosemount. That's what we're gonna decide. As Rosemount, do you say no? I don't want that because that. If there was any bulletin board chip on shoulder situation for the Eden Prairie team, that was going to be oh, they're giving them a home game, now we better beat them, right? Because that Rosemount team was really good. The Epson twins, we've talked about them before, and they had Vano's oldest brother, I think, was on that team, maybe both of his brothers at one point. So that was a really good squad. But I honestly, that 2014 Eden Prairie team is the team I forgot. I don't know much about.
The Spielman brothers.
Okay, so they
Ever heard of them?
Yeah.
JD and
Ronnie, and then Sean Patterson was playing attack.
Yep.
That was Nick Perkins, right? The stone cold lanky crease finisher from every two slides nightmare, right? So you had a lot of the seniors that kind of from again 2013 and 14 Eden Prairie feel eerily similar, 2010, 2011 BSM, right?
Yeah.
You had a lot of culture being ingrained by that older leadership group, and then teaching them how to win and how to do things. And then, they didn't have the perfect record, and that was probably right for that group. Why, Coach Ward was tinkering and doing things. But, I do remember talking to Ryan multiple times. I stepped away from the game there for a sabbatical, let us call it, during a couple of years there. And I remember talking to Ryan that weekend, and he was just irate about the weather. They're going to move the game there. They're not going to mow the field. Lance is going to do everything, and
Yeah.
it was, I just reminded him, I was like, man, they've got to play you too, right? Like, keep that in mind, Ryan. Like, be in that mindset. Go down there, accept the challenge, right? And I think it was played at like what 11 o'clock on a Monday. Like,
Yeah.
so
It was like a late Monday morning thing. I just remember like I wanted to go to that game so desperately bad, but I had to work.
Yeah.
So it was just like,
yes,
and there was no streams.
Yeah.
So it was just a matter of just like you couldn't watch it online. It was just
There's
wait for the
barely
paper.
film back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 11 a.m. on a Monday, that's not prime time. That's the matinee. I mean, I hate 5:30 p.m. weekday games. I can't imagine what life would be like trying to prepare a bunch of high school kids for a state final at 11 a.m. on a Monday in the middle of June after school is out. That would be
Honestly, hey, devil's advocate. At least you wouldn't have to like wake up and think all day about the game.
true.
Like you
True.
basically wake up,
Fair
hey,
point.
let's get a little brekkie and let's get on the bus and go.
Yeah. No,
I don't know.
No, that's a fair point. I think as a coach, that would probably be nice. I think
No one. It'd be terrible.
but yeah, that very interesting year. 2015.
Yeah, if you think 14's interesting, this has got to be the
15
curveball
was a wild
of the last 20 years here.
This was nuts.
Yeah. So 2015, White Bear Lake, 18-1. They lost their opening game to Wayzata and won 18 straight to win the state final. And I don't even know if White Bear was the number one team at any point in the season.
No chance.
18-1 until the last game of the season. So this was a fun year. Jefferson and Prior Lake were 1-2 the entire season. And of course met in the section final. I didn't go to that game, but that was a huge one. And everybody
2 years in a row for PL blowing it in the section finals.
Not to bring up sore memories, but I think the public here is going to say the winner of this game is winning the state tournament, right? Like that was what everybody was saying. It was just a lock. And shout out to Coach Brandon and the White Bear Lake Bears. They just did their thing. A team that, I remember seeing that White Bear when we were at state with Blake in 13, I believe. And I just remember just how like tough they were. They just were a little bit tougher. They fought a little harder for ground balls. It wasn't anything fancy, but they just kept coming at you over and over. I don't think Connor Dennert left the field if for 60, 48 straight minutes. That dude was an Iron Man. And Ethan Peterson, a really great player over throughout the season, but the guy saved his best for last, and just dominated faceoffs in that game and knocked off Jefferson, who was 18-0 at that point. So that was their only loss of the season. But that was a crazy year.
Yeah, I mean the big thing with that, I mean, I was again just like watching that game and just sitting in. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I fully expected Jefferson to win just because of the talent that they had. This was Ryan Graff at the height of his powers.
Yep.
And then just seeing White Bear have a plan, stick to the plan, because again, you mentioned Dennard being an Iron Man and Peterson at the faceoff X, but they played a zone defense. Rammert ate up every single shot from the outside, and they just did not have an answer for it.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think I was traveling for this, but again, there was a stream or somebody who had like a Facebook stream or something. Like this was early, right? And it was impossible to see, but the Lax Hub kind of live feed was getting updated, and it was kind of like, whoa, like White Bears like in this. Oh, they're winning. Oh my God, they're like now they're up by 4. Now they're up by 5. Like, oh, what's gonna happen? And so it was one of those years that this was like maybe one of the first times that a team that a lot of people didn't expect to win like just came out of nowhere. And it's unfortunate because they were a really good team all year, but they were just overshadowed by a couple other teams. But you know what? The only ranking that matters is the one at the end of the season. So
yeah,
really great team.
Because like the other thing.
Yeah.
Oh, go. Okay,
I,
I was
I,
just gonna
I,
say,
no.
honestly, the only other thing to note about that White Bear team was like the game before in the semifinal, they played a 1-goal game with Eden Prairie. It was like 14-13.
Yep.
So I assume that, like, again, gritty team against another athletic gritty team, there's going to be nothing left in the tank.
Yeah.
And they still had enough to win it all.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember going to that game. Actually, I had my dates wrong. My sabbatical was 2012 through 2013, right, Chaun? Because I was back at, that's where I joined the Wyzetta staff for
Correct.
14 and 15. I
Correct.
forgot. So that actually that one, I was like, oh, I remember that game because that was Connor's senior year. He was playing with him and Ethan played for me on Elite, right? They came to Wyzetta. We played them their opening round game, and I remember playing against them and looking over to Coach Her and going, "We're not going to be able to defend them. We just got to hope that we can outscore them." Right? Like that was literally the name of the game, and I think we were fortunate enough that we were indoors. They weren't at that point of the year, but I remember being at that state final game because I did go to that one because I wanted to see what happened. Right? That you had this, Jefferson, right? Like it was theirs to be had, right? And White Bear's game plan was just flawless, like to a T. And I remember, I think, Chaun, I think I even texted you during this point of the game,
Yeah.
uh, where I literally texted Chaun. I was like, Jefferson is down 6 and they're in a zone. And White Bear Lake is just
They were
going to
just trying
kill
to
this
stop the
game.
bleeding. They were trying to stop
Yeah,
the
they were
bleeding.
going to start. It was the same thing for them, and Jefferson was extremely talented. But White Bear Lake, they just had an answer for everything, and I think Brandon did the absolute best job in the world preparing that team to be right at the biggest games of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. And so, we talked a little bit about that Jefferson Prior Lake section final, PL 1 and 2 the whole year, going to 16. And I don't know, maybe this is where people started thinking, oh, PL's going to be down. They were 5-4 in May. May 5th, they were 5-4. They won 10 straight to get that first Prior Lake title. That amazing turnaround. I don't know if there's a lot of 5-4 teams that go on to win the state final. I think it's that a huge testament to the coaching staff there. But that team was, PMAC, you might know a little bit more about the guys on that team. All I remember from 2016 was the Lakeville North 10-man ride came out, and that was like the biggest news and they were just crushing teams. And then it sounded like, again, I wasn't at the game, but Fleck and staff 10-man ride, they implemented it not only to like be okay with dealing with it, but they just threw it right back in North's face, and it worked really well. And a dominant win in the state final.
Yeah, I don't think a ton to add. A lot of big names. Probably the biggest name would be Ben Ward, guy who went on had a good career at Air Force. Is having a real career in the Air Force now. So shout out to him. He's a really good guy. But yeah, no, like this was probably a Prior Lake team, like maybe you mentioned or alluded to, that was probably a little counted out. In 14, they were kind of 1-2 with Rosemount most of the year after. In 15, kind of 1-2 with Jefferson. And this was probably the first year where people started to question, all right, are they going to be able to, reload with all the big graduation? And, after a rough, maybe April, they were able to, kind of connect some things. And, Fleck and company, Fleck Methune, made some adjustments and, we're able to go on that run.
Yeah, I remember we had the facility at that time, and Casey came in to drop something off, like I don't know, some pennies or something from Lavin, and he's like, "I'm blowing it all up. We're like the off, like we're going motion." I can't remember what he said, but he just was like fed up. He's like, "We're just resetting everything. I don't care at this point," and obviously it worked. Whatever they decided to do. There are a couple names too. So shout out Coach Bushy, Evan Bush, senior attackman. I don't know, like how involved he was on the squad, but great dude. That Team 36 shout out there. Ben Ward, you mentioned Carter Collins had a great career. He was part of that attack group. Really good.
He was young at that point too.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was probably a sophomore.
Mm.
Junior, it looks like.
Junior? Okay.
Yeah, Preston Jellin, who was, one of the best athletes to come out of, Prior Lake Lacrosse, was a sophomore that year. Matt Denman, really
Oh
great
yeah.
player, that was, was a good hockey player too. So, I kind of, like you said, maybe count it out because of the previous couple years that Souter was so
Yeah.
great and everybody was like that was going to be the year. But I one thing I remember from that year and that team was goalie Noah Oram.
Yep.
Like just something clicked and he went on a run. Obviously it's team sport, but like he had a great section and state run in goal, which when that happens, it makes things a lot easier when you got strong goaltending through the playoffs.
And that year he was like a senior who, won the job. You had, well, this is going to sound weird, but you had Wiener, in 2014, and then you had Little Wiener coming up, and he was, a sophomore at that point. So, they were kind of duking it out. The senior ended up winning the job that year, and talking about that 10 man, he was athletic and was a goalie who was able to play out and be active, in that 10 man ride.
Heading into 2017, Coach Chaun, Coach Horn now are together at Benilde. Um, if you guys need a moment before we start talking about this, we can, but
Is this year one? Is this year one of this is year two? Okay.
Okay. Um, Egan Wildcats. If there was ever a team that embodied Egan Wildcats lacrosse, this was the one. Um, 18-1. They scored 297 goals in that season. I think that's the most all time for a team. Uh, they they were everything that Egan wanted to be, and Coach Felter had the perfect group to do that. They had a bunch of kind of, I don't know, renegade, rogue style offensive guys that could win matchups. They were great finishers, great shooters. They had Jack Currington in goal, who had a nice 70% save percentage over the years, so pretty solid. But I think what stuck out that year from at least the, I don't know, some of the things that I heard from inside was that Joey Hoffman, their faceoff guy, was kind of a kid that was on the roster, didn't really have a role, and he was like, "Sure, I'll start taking faceoffs," and he got really good at it. And if you want to play that tough lacrosse, up tempo, high risk style, you gotta be able to win faceoffs and you got to get saves. And they had the right guys in the right positions, and just a really electric team. And they got their first state championship.
No comment. No kidding.
No comment. No comment.
Um, let me say this, just in terms of like that Egan team, and just the Egan staff with like Bob Felter, Tony Matea. If there is a staff that I'm going to lose to, it's going to be those two because I respect the hell out of them. Like I've known Bob since I was a sophomore in high school when he owned Dakota Lax in Rosemount. He sold me my first long pole. So to see him raise the trophy made it hurt a little less. Now, during the game was a goddamn nightmare. Just because they could score from anywhere. I mean, they were forcing passes to the crease that would make any offensive coach like tear their head out or tear their hair out. And yet they're still just slicing and dicing guys. I will credit Rob for this. We've never let a loss go to waste because after that loss, we're like, no more D-middies. Like we're going two-way players because they burned us in transition every single time. And it was just early offense transition that killed us.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like I say that we allowed 17 goals, but really it was 19, just because we were really pressing at the end. But yeah, that team was just insane.
Yeah, again, not to bring PTSD. It was just Chaun, you mentioned Team of Destiny, right? They just everything fit to be the Egan Wild, like that. Just was the right group. And yeah, not a big get a touch and get around a couple times. They were more just if we just have the ball, we're just going to go to the rack and jam the crease and we'll ride if we fail. Like it was just an interesting. No other team really has played like that until maybe 2023 when we get there. But yeah, such a unique squad. Um, heading into 2018.
Hold on.
27.
2017. I think Chaun brought up the Dark Army in 2012. It was the beginning of the Dark Army in 2012. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Dark Army died in 2017. This was another team that
We were undefeated, right?
they were undefeated. My brother slayed them, and really proud of him. He was like a sophomore. That was his coming out party.
The birth of
As like
number 52.
yeah, he was number 52. Just an ugly number coming out of nowhere. There's a couple of kids, that year. But all jokes aside, that Eastview team,
The only team to beat Egan that year, by the way, too.
Okay. Didn't have that in my notes. Only team to beat Egan that year. They had a Stillings. They had a bunch of dudes. Really good team. And after that, it was kind of the downward spiral began. It didn't happen quickly, but now they're a combo. But it was kind of the start of the decline of Eastview.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead, Rob.
No, I want to throw on there on that Egan team, right? Like, I think there was at one point during that game, I looked over to Chaun and was like, we can't stop this.
No, we couldn't.
Like, there's nothing, like, whatever we scout, whatever we draw up, how do you defend chaos? You can't, right? Like, there was a goal I will never forget of a kid throwing a skip pass to Wirtz, cutting like in a window, like here, like literally here. He catches it and goes around the world with it off the crease. But the pass, the kid was like literally standing 2 steps away from us off the sideline, right in the box. I'm like, this kid's not throwing that in there.
But he
There's
just
no
winged
way.
it in there.
And he just threw it in there. I was like, he's not going to catch that. Like, we had 2 poles on this kid, like collapsing. I was like, I looked at him, I was like, we can't defend that. Like, how do you stop that? How do you even prepare for it? So
that's
team of
it.
destiny,
I mean, like,
sure.
I mean, kids are looking at me. It's like, what can we do? It's like, there's nothing you can do there. It just happens.
Yeah. Brandon Wirtz, kind of a forgotten name a little bit, but he had a ton of points that year. And really, I mean, he's got to be on the all-time hands team for sure, at least from the little that I saw him play. Really crafty player. Um, you know, the other thing too, I gotta mention, because we've talked about some notables that maybe didn't win state, but 16, 17, 18 time frame, Coach Moose and the Matamidi Zephyrs had some great teams that just didn't break through. They lost an OT to this Egan team in the state semis.
God, I wanted Matamidi to win that game so bad.
Yeah. And so Ogo Factory, we've talked about it. They've had a lot of good teams over, that stretch. In the kind of the mid 2010s there, mid to late 2010s, Matamidi was unbelievable. And so, they're a couple goals away, a couple goals short. Heading to 2018 now. Prior Lake back in the saddle, 17-2. They lost to Rosemount at the end of the year, but beat them handedly in the section final. PMAC, we were traveling for Team 36, and I believe Tyler Little Wiener made like a crazy save from his butt or something.
Save on his butt.
Yeah. And so and that was against Benilde, another great game. And this kind of set up the basically inevitable for the next however many years of like we're all just kind of waiting for Prior Lake Benilde on June 15th, like kind of situation. But yeah, you guys feel free to add to that year or that season.
Yeah, I mean, both teams were incredibly talented. It was a collision course, to say the least. But yeah, just in that game, I remember one of our All-American defensemen, Jack Wrigley, tearing his ACL in the first quarter.
Yep.
And that's what really swung the game, just because twofold. One, we were down a pole, a very good pole. And secondly, there was probably a solid 8 to 10 minute window where the team was like, what's going to happen now? And it was just navigating that like uncertainty of like, what can we do? And again, not letting a loss go to waste, just really developing every single poll top to bottom, just in case, you know, the fourth or fifth guy has to go in, because we were between a rock and a hard place. Because that year, Prior Lake had elite midfield, and it came down to like, all right, do we take our LSM, who's covering these very good midfielders? I mean, one was like John Leffler, went on to play at St. John's, who like with time and room was a sniper. So we're like, I didn't want to take away any strength that we potentially had up top. So then we're bringing like basically our fourth slash fifth pole to play that third position. We're jostling around matchups. We ended up losing 8-10, but yeah, that's what I remember. And honestly, and that's the decision that I'll say it haunts me. It's like, if we would have pulled our LSM down to close and we would have rolled him out at LSM, like our fourth or fifth pull at LSM, could we have done better? And I always go back and forth. I think of that probably like once a month in terms of play.
Speaking of just other teams, so Matamidi was Benild's semifinal game, a 9-6 game, and Prior Lake played Minnetonka in a 13-11 game. This was one of the better state tournament, at least state semis. A lot of really good lacrosse there in the semis. Minnetonka had a great team that year, I believe.
Very good.
Fran and Brunzi's brother was there as well. And then Matamidi again was that his name escaping me, but he plays at Notre Dame or played at Notre Dame. Was that his year?
Hagstrom.
Was he
Con Hagstrom. Yeah, that was the Hagstrom. Yeah, because that was Banuski's.
Year, probably. And they obviously had other good players too. So a really, really good state tournament.
Yeah, talking on kind of like the Prior Lake side, I think if you look at all of kind of like the Prior Lake rosters, this is probably the deepest team. Hearing Chaun talk about, do I move this pole here? Or do I leave him up at the midfield? Like, not to say it wouldn't have mattered, but you had so much depth. If we're talking about the offense, you had so much depth scoring, and you could just roll out the next midi line, and you had 3 attack on the field that could do so many different things. You're talking about the polls, since I'm more of a poll guy, like you had at least one poll dressed up as a manager that would be on the state championship team the next year. So it was kind of and your backup goalie was Colin Nauertz, who obviously went on to play at Lindenwood. So and was the championship goalie, the following year. So like Benild, this was a very deep team, and maybe the deepest team Prior Lake has ever fielded.
I would agree with that. I think, I think talking to Chaun, game planning going into that, I think that was my fear of death by 1,000 shots in front of the goal, right? Because every one of those minis could get their hands free. They all had shake and wiggle, right? They all ran their push pull system flawlessly, and they only needed this much room to get shots off. I can't remember, Chaun, I remember the drill that we did going into that game of like literally practicing with guys. Like, if you give him more than a step, it's in the back of the net. And like the guys were struggling with it so much. I was like, guys, this is how talented they are. So I would agree with the PMAC. I think that was a great final. Like, that was a fun game, right? It was hot. I remember, that's what I remember
extremely
about
hot.
That one.
I remember Seamus Foley getting cramps, and then me running to the student section, because again, we're at Chanhassen at the time, and like, how the stands are on top of you, but they're also elevated. I remember like going on the warning track, like between quarters, yelling at the student section, like, get him a Snickers bar. He needs a Snickers bar, like any kind of blood sugar, just to like, so he wouldn't cramp up.
I love these inside stories of field level. It's amazing. 2019. This 19 Prior Lake team comes out. I don't want to say out of nowhere. They were 16-3, but as PMAC said, 2018 was kind of this team that was loaded with talent. But similar to what we saw with BSM in 10-11, Eden Prairie 13-14, there was this kids that were not even on the varsity team, but they would have started anywhere else, finally getting their 1 year to play varsity, and they jump in. That 2019 defense had a lot of kind of unsung heroes, and went on and another great final against Benilde, a low scoring game. So for the D coaches here, they love kind of a low scoring kind of rock fight game. But again, Prior Lake Benilde, the inevitable meeting in the final.
Ted, to your point, this was a very, at least on the Prior Lake side, I don't know what the Benilde scores were. This was a very low scoring tournament for Prior Lake. The if I pull up the scores, the Eden Prairie game was like something ridiculous. Let me pull up the scores here. It was extremely.
So yeah,
go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was gonna say, not to get ahead of you here, but anyways, so fun fact: Coach Kepner and I are tied for fewest goals allowed in a 3-game tournament, because Kepner, like, you guys only allowed 10 goals in 3 games in 19, and we allowed 10 goals in 3 games in 21. And again, to your point, it seemed like this entire state tournament was just a fucking rock fight.
Yeah. So Prior Lake Eden Prairie was a 4-3 game. Yeah, I was at that game. It was super hot, 3 p.m. under in the sun at Minnetonka. Eden Prairie running some sort of.
They ran a zone with Matsui. Like Matsui just takes up the whole zone.
He was Ed Reed. He was like basically playing like free safety, just like in the middle.
And he was like covering guys and then passing them off and covering new guys and telling everybody on the defense what they should be doing at the same time.
Correct.
No surprise that he went on to have a great college career at Virginia. But I do remember that game being low scoring. It looks like Benilde 10-3 over St. Thomas Academy. That 2019 St. Thomas Academy team was good. They had some really good athletes and nice run for them. Any thoughts on those games?
Just in terms of like the semifinal, we did play that STA team, and Luke Williams was the #1 guy in that scouting report with a bullet, just because it was very much. Again, I'm not trying to discredit any other player on that St. Thomas team, but Luke Williams was the offense. He made the team go.
Didn't he do everything? Face off, defense, offense?
Yeah, pretty much. So I mean, like, again, like Ironman scenarios, like he would dodge, down the alleys as a midfielder. He would play at attack. He was mostly playing at attack that game. We had Seamus on him, did a phenomenal job. When we slid, I mean, we stayed on doubles. Like, Ted, I sent you a picture from that game of just like 3 dudes converging on him and a stick flying in the air. Just because, again, we knew that if we slowed him down, contained him, stopped him, then we were going to be in good shape.
Yeah, and that STA team, they beat Matamidi in the quarters in a 4-5 matchup, and I remember being there. I think that game got a little heated between coaching staffs. I know, Rob, Coach Moose a lot better than I do. But St. Thomas Matamidi, 2 teams that see each other a lot. Are they in the same conference? Yeah, they're in the same conference, pretty sure. So they see each other every year. It's kind of like a lacrosse rivalry a little bit. Now you're playing at state against each other, an 11-8 game, really close. Stakes are high, but that was a fun game. Just 2 teams that you could tell there was more on the line than just a state quarterfinal. There was a lot of pride, a lot of bragging rights. So yeah, very very like low scoring tournament, but Prior Lake gets their back-to-back. Then we head to 2020, the lost season. We had Vano on the podcast to start this new year of DTA. We talked to him about that. Obviously that Benilde team was really loaded. I think there was a couple other teams that were really good too. So it was a shame that we never got to see it through. But Sean and Rob, any thoughts on those guys and your 2020 season as you prepped for it?
I think Chanhassen was also in that mix that year.
Yeah.
If my memory serves me correct.
Yeah.
I think Stillwater was also.
Stillwater was like just like starting, like they were
starting their ascension, right? A little bit there. So and obviously, you can't discredit the Lakers, right? 2-time defending state champions. And I think, PMAC could probably allude to, what he felt that group would have had. But that will, like, as a coach now who's no longer involved, and as I step away and I look back, right, like I'll remember these lot wins, right? I remember the losses more. Um, but that will be something that I will never be whole from,
Yeah.
right? And not being able to experience whatever that final
Yeah.
story was for those boys for 4 years. And Sean and I talk about this all the time. I felt like that would have been the greatest team I ever coached. Period. Like, and I can say that with 100% confidence that that was. And Ted, I used the words with you earlier tonight. Like that was my Mona Lisa. I knew that. I
Yeah.
knew what we assembled that year, and I knew when we went down to Ohio State that summer
I was just going to bring
before.
that up.
So I think that's the only thing I can hang my hat back on when I think about that 2020 year and how the world took everything away from all of us there for about 2 years. Was that is at least we had that Ohio State tournament with them that
Yep.
summer that made it feel like they had something together.
Yeah.
So,
So
Chaun.
yeah, so the Buckeye team camp is what we're talking about. So basically, it was coming off the 5-3 loss to Prior Lake, and everyone was just basically like all in terms of like, we are going to win the state title in 2020. Period. Done. It's going to happen. So we throw all the guys in a bus and we basically take this team that we have and we drive to Columbus, and we're playing teams like the Episcopal School of Dallas. We're playing Cathedral. We're playing like the top teams in their like respective states. And we're not only winning, like we're dominating some of these teams. Like we're playing the championship game of this Buckeye battle against a Texas team, the Episcopal School of Dallas, in the horseshoe with the Ohio State staff on the sideline. And they're taking notes. They're impressed. They're yucking it up with each other because they see the insane amount of talent that's on the field right now for both teams. And again, like to Rob's point, I mean, Winter League comes and like, all right, we have a dome. We hear about this weird COVID, Corona, like this whole thing that hit the West Coast. Do we think we have to worry about it? No. It's out in Seattle. It's totally fine. And a month later, like we're shut down.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean,
You,
crazy.
so PMAC, I mean, what would you guys take out of that 2020 experience? I mean, Ted, you as well. I mean, we were all connected to it, but I think like those young men across the state, regardless of what program, right? We can talk about it from our perspective, but I think the whole state as a whole will always wonder what if, right?
Yeah. You mentioned Chan. I was doing, well, PMAC and I both, but
Yeah.
we're doing a lot of stuff with Chan, and that Chan 2020 group was sort of our first Team 36 kind of big group that we had come through that had a lot of recruits, and kids that could really play. And yeah, I mean they were loaded too. And so it was, and there was also a handful of Prior Lake kids on that team, and they kind of all became friends. So I would have loved to see kind of where that Chan team would have fallen, with against PL, against Benilde, and they probably would have played both of them in the season. Yeah, and it was, it just is what it is. But yeah, like you made an interesting point of like you don't get any closure. We can't go back. Like we never know. Like Chan can say they were the best, and PL can say they were the best, and Benilde can say we had the most talent, and it's a shame that those guys never got to see it through. But something I mentioned to Jack when he was on, I said that 2020 group from Minnesota, a lot of them went on to have great college careers.
Yeah.
It was almost like they went in hungry. They went in with this perspective of like, this can be taken away from me. And a lot of them had great 4-year careers at all levels.
I mean, you got Colin Hagstrom walking away with at least two national championships, right? With Mason Waterman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who followed up a year later, right? And I think most of them are done at this point, minus Seamus, who
Seamus.
is going one more row go at it at Georgetown this spring. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and Jack obviously at High Point, and then
Mm-hmm.
on to pros and winning a professional championship. Two
Mm-hmm.
shout outs for Team 36 guys, Chan kids. Hunter Holcomb, I think, has the all-time assist record at Colorado Mesa, and Ryder Raffy was the Division II All-American last year at Lewis. So two guys that like had really great careers at the college level, and then a handful of Benilde guys that had really great careers at the college level. So that's kind of the silver lining from 2020, is that these kids got to have something that maybe a lot of kids that get it in high school, they don't get it in college. And so that's the only way you can really make like sense and positivity out of the whole situation. Kind of bringing us now to 2021, where I feel like the majority of our listeners now can kind of now look and go, okay, I remember 2021. I don't know if they remember the 2012 Eastview Lightning. Some of these kids might not have even been born when the 2007 Benilde team won the state championship. So now we're in 2021. Another, uh, I'll say when I started this project after Chaun put the bug in my ear, 2020 or 2021 Benilde to me was like the team I thought was going to be the greatest team, like the greatest team of all time. Is from like talent. They won this. They won the tournament. Just the amount of just everything. And I mean, 5 All-Americans: Dowden, Burns, Leishow, Nylander, Bogan. Is it Bogan or Bogan?
Yeah, Braxton Bogan. Yeah.
You gave up double digits one time. Average margin of victory 10.84 and 3.73 goals against average. Just a dominant team, and once again played Prior Lake in the final. It was inevitable. Pretty dominant win in that game against a good Prior Lake team that year. And that team was just loaded top to bottom. I still think Patty Burns is one of the best lacrosse players I've personally seen. Just his skill set. But I'll digress and let you guys talk about that group.
We played pissed off. It's as simple as that. Just because we had lost 3 in a row, 2 to Prior Lake. We lost a season, and these guys were playing for basically for the seniors that never could have a shot at the title. Like, this was, in terms of like a team being close together, in terms of like having a unified goal, like this is it. And a lot of it was like this senior leadership of Patty Burns and Jackson Leishow. Jackson Leishow, to this day, like I tell like people, like whoever will listen, like he's hands down one of the best leaders I've ever been around, period. Just because, again, like he was able to balance kicking you in the ass if you needed it, or putting a hand over your, like basically like throwing an arm around you and like trying to encourage you. Again, just defensively, we had Braxton Bogan, Mason Mortelman, Sam Peichel, Justin Dallum in net, Kyle Stevens at LSM. We were stacked on the defensive end, but offensively, I mean, the thing is, there were times in practice when I would just like sit back and just like, can you believe this shit? Like, can you believe how good this offense is? Just because, again, not to toot Rob's horn here or anything like that, but I mean, they could spin the ball. I mean, it was a pretty offense to watch.
I remember 2020 summer went to a tournament in the Dells, and we played I was coaching the 2023s. We played the true 2023 AAA team or something. And the kid in a Benilde helmet was out there, and we didn't play them much. So then, obviously knew they were Minnesota kids, but didn't know any of the kids. And kid in a Benilde helmet is out there just slicing us up. Like, I mean, BTB passes, he's all over the place. And I texted Rob, I'm like, who the hell is this guy? I'm like, is he just wearing a BSM helmet? Is he a BSM kid? And you're just like, Carson Brandt, like he's gonna be the next guy.
Know the name.
And I think was he a starter? Did he play a ton on that 2021 team? I don't remember, but
Yeah.
Kind of a coming out party for him. And obviously a really amazing player through his career, but I was like, oh, this guy's going to be a problem here.
Yeah. So he went on that Ohio State trip to kind of like get ingrained into the Benilde culture. And like, yeah, he was a starter for us in 21. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, to Carson's point, I just want to highlight one more guy that does not get credit because he played primarily D-Midi that year. Brad Little.
Yep.
Brad Little in the Stillwater semifinal locked guys down. Like Stillwater didn't know what to do. Like they wanted to attack short sticks, and Brad kept turning guys away. So I just want to highlight Brad Little.
That really great player. That's a great call out. Again in PL that year, making it to the final. I don't know if you want to call it unexpected. It's on brand for the Lakers to have people not think they're going to get there, and then they just get there again. beating an Edina team that was really good that year in the section final. Was that OT or was it OT the next year?
It was an overtime. This was actually an electric night, and this was probably our rookie podcast season. So, that year, I was maybe a little hard on the Edina cake eaters, and I was probably kicking them and chirping them, and maybe I made some enemies that year. Hopefully, they've gone away by now. Hopefully, they've gotten the bit. But Edina, had a squad. And this section final night, it was boys and girls. Prior Lake versus Edina at Edina. Crazy night. Luckily for the Lakers, we prevailed. My sister was playing, they took care of business. And then the boys had the game under the lights, and back and forth, game for the ages. Lakers came away in overtime. But that Edina team, that was probably one of their best teams, I would assume. They're kind of on, they're back on the rise. They had a really good team in 21. They got young. Now they're back on the rise, obviously, as we've been documenting over the years. Edina had a squad in 21.
Yeah. And Stillwater, a team you mentioned in 2020, that was kind of a team to watch. They had a great team, and that was the kind of a run for them to start being sort of a team that's kind of always there now. And so another kind of notable team. So I prefaced this with saying, like, I thought 2021 BSM was the best team ever, just off the top of my head. Well, I go to 2022 and you have a bigger margin of victory, a 19-0 season, and less goals against average at 3.68. So this team was actually, by stats perspective, better than 2021. Obviously some great players that, again, some people probably know now, have seen, that have been in high school or watching high school lacrosse. I don't know. Thoughts on this team, and another final against the Lakers. So it ended up being PL BSM again. One of the amazing final, another great game. But your thoughts?
I thought my world collapsed right as Simonson stuck that goal with 56 seconds to
56
go in the
seconds.
fourth quarter.
Under a minute. It was under a minute.
Right. It was I'll never forget looking up at that clock and looking at Chaun and going and at that point, Chaun knew I wasn't coming. The staff knew I was retiring, right? And I looked at Chaun. I was like, "It's not ending this way. Not again, right?" And that was an unbelievable game, right? And we talked about it, when we were on the pod the year, later on, about the unsung heroes of that game. But I mean, that was just a great year overall. I mean, we were constantly trying to find our identity, trying to figure out who we were, right? We had players, we had some good leadership. Chaun, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, though. I mean, this was a quiet leadership group, though,
Very much
right?
so.
Where some of the others were a little bit more intense and, really driven by the mantra and the culture that we established. But this one was a little bit more, I think, coach-led, right? And maybe that was the sense of urgency that we felt, as the window was closing. But I also remember going into that game, right, and Prior Lake knowing we are going to see hell and high water for literally the next 48 minutes. They are going to throw everything at us. Simonson is still to me, is one of the top 10 players in the state's history, right? That kid's ability to lead his team, carry his team, show up in big moments, make the right play at all times. He terrified me, for weeks, just thinking about when we see him again, how are we going to contain his playmaking ability? And that team was talented and gritty, and and it was just a great matchup for the state to watch. Think about some of the other teams that were out there, right? Centennial's kind of rebirth, started that during that cycle. Chaun obviously was there as well, and you had Stillwater going toe to toe with us in the semis, right? Us making some coaching decisions that we had to do for our boys at that moment of time. So And I'm just going to leave it at that, PMAC.
Yep.
We can debate that as however we want to debate that. Um, but what a great team, and no other way to define it.
Another state tournament that was miserably hot. At least quarters were.
Yeah.
But it was like that was a tough one. But yeah, that 2022 BSM team again, they run it back. And that kind of the emergence of the next group of Red Knights that we saw over the next couple of years. But Brandt, Gus Bell, who some people might know, Sky Rolled, yeah, Justin Dallum, one of the best
Mhm.
goalies of in Minnesota that I think I've ever seen, and has had a great college career as well. And Kyle, who we've had on the podcast, one of my favorite interviews that we've had. Guy is just hilarious. So, but he was a gamer, right? And we've talked about him before, but sort of that next team of vanilla players that were notable. Heading into 23 now, um, you know, I think a lot of people knew about Lakeville North. They kind of had a little sniff in 21.
Not before the season. They weren't even top 10, according to Lax Hub. No.
I like in
I,
21. So Quinn
Are my
Power.
notes correct on that?
Well, so in 21, Lakeville almost beat PL in the semis, and there was a faceoff violation, I believe, in
Yeah.
overtime, and PL escaped, and I think that was kind of the start of like Lakeville North and people, this 2025 class. I didn't know much about the 25 class, but they had been there, but Quinn Power got hurt in 22. And Lakeville had a tough season, but he was kind of back in 23. But I will agree with you, PMAC, that I think in the public eye that they were not in the top 10 preseason for at least for Lax Hub, and I would say most people probably didn't realize what was coming up the pipeline unless they were really invested.
If they were invested in DTA Nation, they knew.
Fair enough.
They
Fair enough.
knew. We
yeah,
were talking.
Yeah.
you were, and I specifically remember sending Ted a text. I
Yep.
think their third game of the season. I was like, "That's the wagon.
Yep.
Watch out!" And right, Benilde homer through and through. But after watching Benilde spin the ball and watching Lakeville North spin the ball, Lakeville North found that unique blend of ball possession, high lacrosse IQ, and Egan 2017 playing with
Yeah.
house money,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're not going to stop that, right? And then you mix in the athletes and the Piscatellos, and then you got Power winning like every face off, and then you have Winship back there quarterbacking the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like they had swagger. Like,
Yeah. And
that's the only way to describe that team.
I was gonna bring up that text you sent. I think it was actually the first game of the season. It was against Minnetonka, who a lot of people were like 2023 Minnetonka is the team because they were so senior heavy. And Lakeville North, it was a good game. I think it was a 3-goal game. So I'm not gonna say they like blew them out of the water, but you're right. I think it was like, whoa, this like North team can move it. Like and Quinn is just like boom, he's gone. Right, just face off. It's instant transition every time. And the Piscatelli, all three of them on that team. You talk about nightmares and losing sleep. About that Simonson Prior Lake team. I have nightmares about this Lakeville North team and all the Piscatelli, right? But that team, like we called them like I don't know, that 2023 Lakeville North Electric Factory when we kind of went down, like that kind of springboarded DTA viewership a little bit. I feel like that was a thing we rode, but it has to pay homage to the 17 Wildcats because they were like kind of the original Electric Factory, but the 23 North team definitely kind of reminded me of that. But you're right, Rob. They did possess the ball and knew when to change gears. I think it wasn't just chaos the whole time, but and Austin Winship, a quiet kid. He's not flashy. Like I think going into that season, I was like, all right, I don't know about this guy. Like maybe he's all right. His first step and his leadership, just being around it, in a couple games that we played him, hell of a player. Huge shout out to him. I don't know him super personally, but really respect his game a lot and just who he is. That 2023 Benilde team kind of was the team again. We talked about Brandt and rolled up, or sorry, Brandt and Bell. Sky tore his ACL, so he didn't play, which that hurt them. But still completely loaded. And once again, Prior Lake finding a way when it matters in June, to upset Benilde. That was their only loss. And another fantastic final. Again, not to bring up PTSD, but a really great game. But North kind of fulfilled that team of destiny again, where it just kind of felt like it was going to be them the whole year. And I don't know, but PL that year started 1-4.
Yeah, I want to talk about, some of these notes, a lot of good notes in here, kind of give, some behind the scenes of that year. Starting on that 1-4, we had I think Rob mentioned, or maybe it was Ted, this Lakeville North team just haunting the Piscatellos, haunting you. Our fifth game of the year was against Lakeville North. We got 19 goals against. 19 goals against. I've been with the Lakers officially, the last few years on the staff. Obviously was a player, helped out kind of off season, unofficially, kind of late, 2010s. 19 goals doesn't happen, very often, especially, under a Kepner defense, Chaun. And, with that, Ted, you talked about Casey in 2016, going back to 2016, where you got to blow it up. It didn't happen. This blowing up, it didn't happen in a lacrosse training facility. This time it happened in a different establishment, but we had to reconvene as a staff and blow this thing up. And luckily we did. Players that year, actually, we showed up to practice the next day after, we had a coaches only meeting. We showed up to practice. The locker room was locked up. I was like, is Casey in there? All of a sudden Casey shows up, Kepner shows up, players only meeting. So there's a lot of meetings and meetings of the heads to turn that season around. Big comeback. But that, like you said, Lakeville North that year, Electric Factory, another great game. Talk about BSM game going to overtime. This was another overtime game. And Power at the faceoff. I think we won one faceoff that game, I believe. And it was because Power broke his stick in half. So it was a problem. And that was during an era where we didn't win many draws, as Horn knows. So we had to get creative, and that was another game we had to get creative. We should have broke his stick more often.
And I'd be remiss, I didn't put it down here, but I'm just remembering, all the guys we mentioned were great players, but the unsung hero of that season, Nathan Long.
Oh, how has he not been mentioned yet?
Mr.
Holy
Wonderful.
smokes.
Like he comes out like, and I will not, it was mid-season. We're at Farmington practice and we're talking about like, all right, we're going to have to find a way to solve these guys. And Tim was like, yeah, we have another problem here. There's a kid, they got another weapon that's coming back. Like, I don't know if he had a off the field issue or if he was hurt or whatever. They're like, Nathan Long. I'm like, who's Nathan? Who is this guy? And Tim's like, he's not going to be on the scouting report, but we got to deal with him. And he's a really scrappy kid. And he's the 95 Dave Spihar. He's the kid who just showed up and had the greatest tournament of his life and super gritty player. He had a massive ground ball in our section final game that completely changed the entire game. We were in control for 46 minutes and he soaked a 2-pole check to pick up a GB, go and score. And then they got a couple, they took the lead and then got the insurance goal late, but a gritty player that had 2 overtime winners to win state. So what a team.
One thing about him too in the state championship game, no clue how some of these things happen. Again, like coaches aren't planning this. Student section, every time Long touches the ball, is booing him. That's the last guy we should be booing. You're giving him chips and the kid go like, so again, I don't know if one of the players said, hey, got the, popular people to, hey, let's boo this one kid. Wrong kid to boo.
and he did the can you hear me now when he scored
he wanted it, he needed it, he needed it.
Oh my God. That's yeah, what an epic team that was. Now we're in 2024. We've been on here for an hour and a half now talking hit I if you're with us still at this point, now we can talk about the 2024 Red Knights.
Send us your address. We'll send you something.
Um kind of like talking about the previous, back to back where it was like we're pissed off now because we kind of felt like we should have been there. We didn't. Now 2024, you get Sky rolled back, and you get your entire defense back. You get Gus Bell back. You lose Brant, but there's plenty in the hopper. And the Red Knights, really great season. Only one loss to Jefferson earlier in the year. I wouldn't. Again, this is not a knock, but they weren't as dominant as maybe I expected them to be, but they were like opportunistic and great. Like they were able to win game. Like at the end of the day, you got to win games. And it doesn't matter if you win by 100 or one, but they were finding ways to beat teams and squeak out wins, and then got really strong at the end, but and played Lakeville North, who won it the year before, kind of got to defend their title, pouring rain last year in the state final, which was kind of a fun, footnote to that game. But they took care of business after that Jefferson loss, went on to win the rest of their games and win the state title. Is it Bourget or Bourget?
Borget.
Division one poll, a couple other guys that probably could have played Division one that didn't. But Gus Bell at Army, Sky rolled at Utah. So D1 high end talent on that team. A lot of, I would say guys that would probably get a lot more attention if they were anywhere else, but role players on the Benilde team. And a lot of them are coming back in 2025 here. So, we'll see what they do. Anything with them, PMAC, that on 2024 Red Knights?
Yeah. Well, yeah. This team was a problem. This was one fun note. This was a team that let up the most goalie goals that I've ever heard of. Jefferson got one against them, and we got one against them. So in three teams that play super structured, they're coming in with game plans, and it was our first clear of the day, and we get a goalie goal. Not really how you write it up, but sometimes it's how it works out. So that was kind of a weird thing about last season, but dominant. Horn, I can't remember what year, but putting a team in running time. I don't know if this game, the state championship went into running time last year, but this one was dominant. They didn't leave a doubt, and Gus Bell, really put the team on his back, late in the season when it counted.
That team last year was. Oh, go ahead, John.
I was gonna say like senior heavy. I mean, just that senior class was a special class. That 24 class was special. Yeah. I had the stats in front of me at one point, but I believe 16 of the 18 goals that they scored in that title game were by seniors. 11 of those 16 were Sky or Gus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a team, like what that team last year was really, really good at. And I think you alluded to it, Ted, right? It might not have always been firing on all cylinders from a fluid standpoint in 6-on-6, but PMAC, I think you would probably attest to this in your game even, right? That team knew how to go on runs. And they knew that if you got one, they were going to get the next 4 or 5 over a 3 to 4 minute window. Like that's what that team's identity was. You could get one, but they're going to get 1 or 2 in the third backbreaker within a very short window that just tighten the screws on you. Next thing you know, you're scoreboard watching and then they go on and you get one and they get 3 more. And you're like, okay, you start playing the numbers game in your brain and you're just like, well, the math doesn't compute, and next thing you know, there's another run, you're in the middle of another one. So they excelled at that. And they were just really good at, playing a really aggressive style of defense that allowed them to sustain those runs. So I think staff did a great job of that last year, of preparing them for that. I mean, credit to Lakeville North, right? And PMAC, I think you could talk about this from your experience as well. The hardest thing to do is to get back to the game.
Yeah.
Right. And like Yeah, the teams are on here have showed a lot of success throughout their legacies and their program's history. But like if you win one, it's really hard to get back the next year. And if you lose it, it's even harder to get back because you're dealing with that as well. So I mean, there's got to be a lot of credit given to that Lakeville North program. I don't think a lot of people had them, penciled in of getting all the way back.
Yeah, that's a good point, and big kudos to a team, to any program, right? That can make it once, but like you said, being able to, if it's reloading, if it's rebuilding, if you're building through, a youth system as a public school, or being able to find a way to continued success at a private school where maybe you aren't building through a youth program necessarily. It's tough. And how long is Lakeville North going to be able to do it after this? I don't know. But you're right. Being able to go back to back, getting to the final dance back to back. You got to be able to tip the cap to them for that, for sure.
And yeah, that's a good call out. They were 5-4, after their ninth game on May 7th, and then
that was the storyline last year, Ted, with Lakeville North. We're like, don't worry about the record. I don't care about their record. I'll take their team.
They're the best. Exactly.
Yeah, give me their team come sections, because I don't care what you do in the regular season. I would love this team come playoff time because I know I can go on a run with them.
And they had the right guy.
Exactly.
They had the right type of team to be dangerous in a one-game playoff. In a single elimination, you got an elite face-off guy with a bunch of alpha scorers. And I think that Lakeville North, the statement win for them was the state semis beating Stillwater 17-5. I mean, that was like,
very much so.
Holy smokes. Like they were for real, and they were dealing with injuries and all this crap all year, and they played a really tough schedule. And it was like they didn't sneak back to the final. I mean, they dominated 17-3 to Moorhead, 17-5. So credit to Benilde for kind of going against a team that was as hot as they could be. That's tough to play against the playoffs, and kind of neutralize them, holding them to 10 goals, which was, impressive. So there you have it. The last 18 years of Minnesota high school lacrosse. A bunch of coaches here that have been in a lot of the last games. Hopefully when we have this conversation in the future, I can talk about a Farmington team that is in a final. We'll see what happens. But first, just want to thank you guys for taking time at night to talk about this. I think this is a start of something I think Minnesota lacrosse needs to know, and know like where we've come from and all these great players and teams. Do we want to make picks on who we think the best team of all time is?
Yeah, who is your number one? Who's your squad?
How are we doing this? Who's drawing the short straw? I mean, I'll go first if you want me to.
Yeah, why don't you go first?
Yeah, you go first.
As an offensive guy, I'm taking the 2017 Wildcats, simply because they were just so different. And they just were. It was chaos. What do you call it, Chaun? Fun and gun, Egan Wildcats. So I would love to see this 2017 Egan team play against some of these Benilde and Prior Lake defenses that were really, really strong later on. I think that would have been an interesting. Not to say, Chaun, that the 2017 Benilde defense wasn't good, but yeah, I think I'm taking the 2017 Wildcats.
I'll go out on a limb. If I had to pick, obviously extreme PL bias here. If I had to pick one of the PL teams for the quote unquote best, I'm going 2018. But my favorite would be 2019, because I feel like that was, Flex step down. You got Casey stepping up, a big graduation class, maybe not as deep. Benilde on the rise, they're coming back for revenge. My brother's senior year, maybe 2019's my favorite in some ways, but if I had to pick the best, that 2018 team, super deep, crazy deep.
Chaun, what are you thinking?
I have thoughts. Let's put it that way. I'll say when it comes to picking, I'll say my favorite Benil team. Not that I can pick any of them, but even though statistically 22 was better than 21, 21 was probably the like in terms of like teams I've been around, I would say it was right up there. When it comes to like the overall best champ, it's really hard. And again, like and it's tough because there's like the 18 tournament and the 14 tournament. I would say when it comes to like the 14 tournament, that honestly that 2010 BSM team was nuts. Golly, this is tough. But that 17 Egan. I mean, again, just because it haunts me, that 17 Egan team was an electric factory, like the original electric factory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would go with I think under the old format and the old teams, when I look at those teams, I also kind of weigh like who could play at that upper
Today.
tier,
Yeah.
right? And that 2011 BSM 18-0 team could compete didn't say win against these teams up here. Now, if I have to go now think about like which team on here I would take hands down in a slug out fest against all of these, I would unfortunately I'm going to my homerism. I love that 22 group. That 21 group, even with the one loss though, is it for me? Like that,
Yeah.
and I knowing where that one loss was at Chaun, right? The house of horrors for us. And I mean, we created the ball out of bounds. Like, just things that you never see happen on a lacrosse field happened that game. And I'm just kind of like, okay, that was good to happen. So I would say completeness of a team, 21 BSM is the most complete. I would say the defensive efforts, our late 2019 was like PMAC, that performance on that field. I mean, it was a rock fight, 5-3. And
5-3.
And talk about takeaways from these games. Like I walked out of that game and going, if I see another kid shoot the ball from his shoe tops besides number one, I'm going to strangle everybody. Right? Like that was the learning point for me coming off of that one. But like the other one, I think honorable mention on this list, and everyone's giving Egan love. I'm going to also mention the 2015 White Bear Lake team.
Yeah, also going to be my second choice. Yeah, that team. Yeah,
I think those three at the top, I think, had just they had something different during those seasons that propelled them.
Yeah.
Right. Records aside, there was something in the water with those groups. So that's how I would do it.
There it is. We'll probably have to post a poll or something. Nothing like controversy to get the holiday season started. But yeah, amazing discussion. I could talk for another 3 hours about high school lacrosse with you guys. But we appreciate the insight. Horn, thanks for a last minute call up. Chaun, thank you for putting the bug in my ear and coming up with a cool content idea. I think this is a long time coming. And obviously your analysis and having been in a lot of these seasons and games and around for a long time, I think it'll be, our audience will really appreciate your insight. So thank you guys for being here tonight.
Thank you to Coach Chaun, Coach Horn for coming down the alley with us. Good content idea. Great discussion. Did you think it'd go that long? We dove deep.
I don't know. I didn't think it was going to go that long.
We never planned. We don't know, right? We fire the mics on and we hit record.
So originally this was, like I said, Chaun kind of came up with the idea, and then I was like, we were kind of talking about it, and it was going to be maybe like a blog post, and I'm like, this probably needs to be just an episode. Do you want to come on? Yeah, sure, that works. And then, like I said in the beginning, I texted Rob because I was like, I have some questions about like the early days here, like because you were involved, and then he started. I'm like, you just need to come on tonight, like last minute, like appreciate his family, his wife, and and kids, like saying, hey, like, yeah, you can jump on and do this, because like his insight from like pre 2012 when I kind of started getting into it, and Chaun too, like was invaluable to some of those early teams. And you know, it's cool that you and Chaun and Rob have all like been in a lot of these like final games, or like been involved with teams in these final games. So
Right.
that like it was like this was the foursome that needed to play this round of golf for
Yeah.
like I'm narrating, but like we had the right people, and it, you know, hopefully maybe we can get some other coaches from some of these teams on to talk a little bit more like in the future. But
A Felter would be a great interview.
yeah, so Bob, if you're listening or someone knows you know, knows Bob and he wants to come on down the alley, we'd love to have him.
Well, an EP had a great run. You know, if we can get
And they're
Wardo on, you know, whatever.
still in the
Yeah.
mix. Still in the mix. Like, you know, it's like
Yeah.
we talk about Sunday Tiger, playoff EP. Like it's always just inevitable that
Yeah.
they're not gonna make it. They're not an easy out. But yeah, some of those teams are incredible, some great names. And like I think it is something that we need to do more of is celebrate the history. I know it's a short history compared to other sports, but celebrate the history of Minnesota lacrosse and like some of these great games and great seasons that we've had. But yeah, I didn't think it would go 2 hours, but it's make up for a missed episode last week.
Yeah. No, for sure. Speaking of last week, great trip. You know, we're coming off a down the alley, first down the alley experience with us to is the
Yep,
Blackjack Classic
Yep.
out in Henderson, Nevada. Awesome event, you know, adrenaline event. So, you know, when you go to their event, you know, it's going to be well ran. You know, there's going to be college coaches, you know, good film, you know, all that good stuff. You know, what were your thoughts on that trip? And you know, obviously, you know, we'll dive into some food, but you know, lacrosse wise, you know, what were your thoughts on that event?
Yeah. First and foremost, 70 degrees in December playing lacrosse outside. Like after that, like it's all it's icing on the cake after
Yeah.
that. Yeah, great competition. Adrenaline does a great job with their events. They're organized. They communicate. Like they get good competition. They get good teams. They have enough teams to have divisions. So overall, great experience. It's our third time going to that event over the years.
Yeah.
It's always great. So yeah, awesome time.
You know, I got a couple rants on the flight out to Vegas. And it started off right off the hop. You know, we're walking on, and I'm not even talking about post people standing up after. I'm not even gonna, you know, I've already complained about that. That wasn't even the number one thing that bugged me this flight. Number one thing that bugged me was we were walking on, and you've got two people that are gonna, you know, that have like the window and aisle, us, for example. And the person in between was like, oh, do you want to sit by each other? And people were having conversations while we're trying to load the plane about, oh, do you want to sit next to each other? Should we move? Do you want to switch? Yada yada. Sit in your assigned seat. Am I wrong about this?
Um, I don't mind like a quick question and being like, "Yep, okay, cool, boom, done," or
Sure.
"Yep," or "No,
Sure.
I don't want to move, done." But we don't need to break down seed assignments like just broke down state champions for the last
Agreed.
years, and they were breaking it down. They were analyzing and discussing potential pros and cons of the whole situation. So agree with you. It was a huge annoyance. It did not set the positive tone for the flight out.
And that kind of set the tone for our flight. Guy in between us asked us the same question. I'm like, nope, I'm going to spend enough time with this guy. And he was like, oh, all right. I'm like, no, like just, I'm not taking the middle seat, buddy. We got window and aisle. You got the middle, not my problem. So that, you know, kind of set the tone, you know, for this.
He was like pissed, right? Maybe rightfully so, because like I guess he's with all his friends or something, and they like forced him to move seats. I don't know if there was like a situation where someone needed a certain type of seat or something where they had to like make
Yeah.
a change. So they like forced him into a middle seat. So he's probably already mad, but now he's like venting to us about the situation. I'm like, I'm sorry, dude, but I don't care about your situation. And
Yeah. He's coughing all over me,
yeah.
all over us. I text you if this guy gets me sick, I'm gonna haunt him and find out who he is. I get home, Monday started feeling kind of crappy, battled through our training session. Tuesday, battled through work. Then I was out cold. Virus done for 48 plus hours.
Yep.
I hope that guy had a terrible trip. I hope he had no fun. I hope his flight home got canceled and his seat got changed. I hope that guy had a terrible weekend.
Flight home though, nobody in the middle seat.
No, it was elite. It was great.
So like at least good karma coming back. Like you got sick, which is unfortunate, but that was a nice like, I don't know, little little karma there. But yeah, no, he was coughing up a storm. I mean, I haven't gotten sick yet. Hopefully you just you sick and not me. But yeah, that guy was struggling. So we'll see what happens.
And for your food blog that you're gonna start on DTA.com here, downthealley.com.
Is the question. Should I start a Club Lacrosse Travels food section? I don't know. The people maybe need to tell me if that's something that they want.
Well, and if it's what they want, I think they do. I think they should. I think you've got great insight. Because Vic and Anthony's, we gave this place a run, and we've got a deli to talk about, or maybe you need a blog about it and give the people Vic and Anthony's at the Golden Nugget. The Golden Nugget, great little steakhouse. What was our waiter's name?
John.
John was a throwback waiter. John was a throwback. He was classy. This guy is exactly what you want in an old Vegas steakhouse. Great food, great service. But the best thing about this place was their cheesecake.
Yeah. And you're a big cheesecake guy.
I like cheesecake. Yeah, I like cheesecake.
That's like one of your like more favorite like types
desserts,
right?
Yeah, I would say that's like probably my favorite dessert. Like
so, like your expectation and your standard is probably maybe higher than like maybe
average.
Yeah.
I'd say above average. Nothing crazy. I don't think I'm a cheesecake.
I'm not like
dude.
I'm trying to set the stage.
Yeah.
For this next part that you're probably going to go with here.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, and to your point, we get through this great meal, great steak. I think we had, a side to go with it. We're pretty full. You were like, yeah, I'm stuffed. I'm not getting dessert. And I'm like, if they've got a cheesecake on it, maybe I'll give it a run. First thing on the menu, I'm like, yeah, John, let's do your strawberry cheese, cheesecake with the strawberries on top. That sounds great, John. He's like, you're not going to regret it. Thanks, John. It brings out this cheesecake again. You got nothing, and this thing's not slight in any mean. This thing's a cheesecake's cheesecake, and I take one bite, and it's just boom, like to the senses, all the senses, just everything in my body is telling me thank you. And I was like, yup. And I just slide that plate across the table to you. I'm like, you're going to need to take a bite of that one.
The best cheesecake I've ever had in my life until this one, hands down, no competition, was at La Grolla in St. Paul. Little Italian.
Sure. Yep.
Like little small quaint place, best cheesecake I've ever had. Nothing's even come close. That was like 10 years ago, so it's hard to say if this one was better. But
sure.
this one is tie game in the fourth quarter with the La Grolla cheesecake. And I don't know what would have, like, if I go side by side, I don't know what would happen. But yeah, I agree. It was as good as it gets.
That one came to play. I'm gonna tease you with a deli next episode.
Yeah, so deli next episode.
Next episode, we'll tease it. Tease it.
Like I said, if you've made it this long with us, it's been 2 hours. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation around Minnesota high school lacrosse, a little bit of food, a little bit of airplane etiquette. But again, thanks to Rob and Chaun for coming on, talking about high school lacrosse with us, giving us some insight. And if you were coaching or playing or a parent of one of these classic state championship teams, tell us how you feel. Are we wrong for the teams that we picked of greatest of all time. Um, tell us who deserves it.
Yeah. Um, and I don't think we haven't done a deep dive on our new sponsor. Obviously Old Southern Barbecue, the food talk. And they've been riding with us since day two. Old Southern Barbecue has been killing it with us. And they what do they got coming up? They got the ham and the turkey for Christmas here.
Yeah, I think that promotion, if you didn't get in on it, I think you missed it for this holiday. But
Okay.
if
Okay.
we're like, crap, I missed the Christmas ham. I know they got Easter hams as well coming up. So mark your calendar. Make sure that you don't snooze and sleep and miss the ordering window when that Easter ham comes around. I'm sure we'll get some info from the big man about specifics when that rolls around. Easter's kind of start of lacrosse season when things are heating up. So yeah, but hey, 4 metro locations, you can go DTA 15. They can get 15% off if you need a stocking stuffer.
Boom.
Rubs, sauces, merch. So Old Southern Barbecue, if you need a quick bite kind of during this, this Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's, when you don't even know what day and time it is.
Or you're all Christmas shopping. You don't
Shop.
want to cook like you're grinding through the lines. You're throwing elbows at Best Buy, just trying to get your loved one a new electronic.
Yeah. Old
You
Southern
got
Barbecue.
you gotta protein up.
Yeah.
You know,
And then yeah, our new sponsor, our new partner, ES Lacrosse. I guess technically their original location is in Woodbury, but they got Woodbury, Chanhassen, and now Vadnais Heights as well. ESLacrosse.com. You can kind of find them. You can buy stuff online. But again, last minute stocking stuffers for your player, for the coach in your life.
Yep.
They got great selection. They're not like particular or set like I don't know, exclusive with any specific brand. So like they carry
sure.
everything and they're gonna say like here are the options and like here's what every stick does well, or here's like if you're this type of player, this is what you want to use. If you need some answers to that, go in to ES Lacrosse and like that's what they have knowledgeable like current lacrosse people working. I know I went in there for some goalie gear a couple months ago, needed some youth goalie gear. The gal at the front desk is like, here's where we keep our goalie gear. Boom, boom, boom. This is what you need. Here's like the different price points. I was in there and out of there in 5 minutes, dialed in, not waste anybody's time. So I can attest personal review of the experience going there, dialed in, but Christmas shopping, maybe need a last minute gift. ES Lacrosse.
I'm excited about this new partnership too. With ES, hoping to do, some more of that gear content, right? To keep us, up to date on, what is going on with the gear. What are the new trends?
Yep.
What's the new STX defensive head that's dropping, or, what's the new mesh that, the top players prefer to use. I think that'll be good for us and making content around that. I know they've got a good space. They want us to do some content in their space even. So I'm excited about this. And I'm hoping, we'll get good content out of it. But also hope it's a good relationship, for our listeners and the players in the area as well.
Yeah, and coaches that are listening are like booster parents. Like now is the time that you want to call them and like
Yeah.
get your uniforms and helmets and team shooters and all that kind of stuff. Like it has to be done now. Like you're probably already behind the 8 ball a little bit, but like they can take care of you on that end too. But like that April 1 comes real quick. So like they can do that stuff too, like kind of that team sales stuff. So
Well, thank you again for tuning in to Down the Alley. Thanks for Coach Chaun and Coach Horn for talking a little lacrosse history with us. Shout out to Old Southern Barbecue and ES Lacrosse for riding with us this season. And have a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and looking forward to getting after it. Back on the mics here soon.
talk to you later.